Greetings everyone, this is Peter Sko for Music is a Journey. I think we are at episode 46 now, if I'm actually still counting, and today's topic is concept narrative albums. Now, first of all, concept albums, they are fairly common in progressive rock and heavy metal, although not exclusively limited to those two genres or subgenres of rock. Concept albums also exist outside of rock as well, apparently. After I checked the internet, I discovered that. So there are two types of concept albums. The first type is where all of the songs, or most of the songs, are related to a particular theme. For example, Pink Floyd's Animals. All of the songs are titled after a type of animal, such as dogs, pigs, and sheep. And these are all based on George Orwell's book, Animal Farm. And each animal represents a particular class of English society. The working class, the business class, and the political class, as I think that's how it works. Another example is Magenta's 27 Club album, 5 songs, and each song is about a famous music artist who died at the age of 27. So all of the songs follow a particular theme, although they are not necessarily related to one another directly. Now, the other type is the concept narrative, and this is where the entire album tells a story. Now, there are a lot of famous ones. For example, The Who, very famous for Tommy and Quadrophenia. These albums, by the way, I will not be mentioning in this video, simply because I don't have them. Yeah, I know. I saw the movie for Tommy on video when I was a teen, and I used to have Quadrophenia on cassette. I just haven't got them on CD yet, so not those. Another good example is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. That's also a famous concept narrative album. I do have it, but I will also not be mentioning it in this video. So, in the case of a concept narrative, there is a story, and each song basically tells a chapter in the story. There's usually a main character, there are also other characters, there is a plot, there are settings, all the things you need to make a story. It's just that it's played out over a music album rather than in a book or in a movie. Sometimes they also can have extra like sound effects or dialogues in, and sometimes even other people are brought in to contribute the voices to the different characters. Alright, so what I want to do today is to talk about some of my personal favorite concept narratives. And it originally was going to be a list of 10, and then I realized there were 2 others I should put on, and then after all that I realized there was a very important one I was going to put on that I completely forgot about. So we have come up to yet another baker's dozen. Now, the last 2 times I did a baker's dozen video, it turned out to be very long. One of them was broken into 2 parts, and the other one I just let it go, and it was like 54 minutes long or something. So I'm going to try not to focus on talking too much this time. However, I want to point out that in this case here, I'm going to talk about the stories on each of the albums, and I'm not going to talk so much about the music. Alright, so let's get started with our list. So the first album on the list is an album called Warp Riders by a band called The Sword, an American doom metal, stoner rock, hard rock band out of Texas, I believe. The lead vocalist, and I think also one of the guitarists, J.D. Cronus, he came up with an idea for this science fiction fantasy type story. This tells the story of a person named Aerith, who is from the planet Acheron, who has a special guild of archers, and he has been exiled from that guild. However, his planet has also undergone a tidal locking, and it is now facing 3 suns, one side facing, particularly of course, one sun, and then the backside facing the coldness of space. So this is of course a tragedy for his planet. However, Aerith finds some kind of orb, and then it meets up with a being called the Chronomancer, who is outside of space and time. And with the help of the Chronomancer, Aerith will go on a mission to basically try to save his planet from its tidally locked situation. The story tells of a city on the night side of the planet. It tells of 3 witches. It tells of the Warp Riders, basically some space pirates who have a vessel called the Sword, which can fold space-time and slip through the curves. This album is apparently a less of a doom metal album, which is what their first 2 albums were apparently like. They've gone more for a kind of stoner rock, hard rock approach on this album here. But I think it's really great. I love it, and I love the concept. I also love the album art. It was this album art that made me think, this is the album by The Sword that I have to hear. So that's it, The Sword, Warp Riders, an interesting story idea. Would probably make a good graphic novel. Next up is an album I have actually talked about before. This is Ones and Zeros by Third Degree. This is an interesting album. It is based on, or inspired by, it is inspired by the book The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil, and it talks about a future company called Valhalla Biotech, which has the ability to extend life and even take you beyond life. There isn't exactly a particular main character, but there is a person singing I in a lot of the songs, and this I person seems to be experiencing a lot of these things with latest technology and upgrades. And Valhalla Biotech is saying that you can upgrade yourself from the usual human life, which has an expiry date, upgrade to something better. We hear in the story about a person who is a proponent of Valhalla Biotech, who is 137 years and witnesses his own son's death of old age. We also hear a kind of computerized voice speaking to us sometimes, particularly when we, as the listener, I guess, we are undergoing transformation. Our brain will be peeled off in thin layers and digitally or 3D scanned, and it talks about basically transcending human life and taking your consciousness, I guess, beyond. It is a really cool story, and actually I have read Ray Kurzweil's book. I did make a video about this before where I explained it in more detail. But that's, anyway, what this is about here. The transcending human life, extending your life, going beyond that. And it is kind of a story. It does develop, although again, the I character doesn't exactly fit in all of the songs. But it is a pretty cool idea, and the music is really, really great on here too. So that's Third Degree, Ones and Zeros. Here is also an album I mentioned in a video previously about the guitarist on here, Peter Matugniak. This is a band called Gekko Projekt. The album is Rhea of Titan. It was their second album and they only have 2 albums to date. Rhea of Titan tells the story of a young woman named Rhea who goes to Luna City and is going out to pick up a ship to do asteroid mining. However, while she is on her asteroid mining mission or whatever, a meteor punctures a side of her ship and she loses most of her air supply. She cannot get back to base, and her ship is drifting basically through space, and she is going to have a lonely and cold grave. However, out near Titan, a supply vessel called the Angel, which is delivering supplies to an outpost near Saturn's F-ring, sees her vessel, finds out that the sole occupant is still alive, and they go in to rescue her. However, in the process, something happens. I think they are struck also by meteors or something. The ship called the Angel loses its wings, and in the process of rescuing Rhea, the whole ship ends up making an emergency landing, or crash landing even, on Titan. I think everyone survives, but they are now trapped on Titan, and so what they have to do to survive is to use the ship's lasers to tear the ship apart and build it into a new, rather than a spaceship, but rather a ground environment, I guess. And of course, Titan's environment is really harsh, so they have to protect themselves from that, make a dome, and they actually end up making a little colony, maroon colony on Titan. Now, a rescue is supposed to come for them, but a war breaks out, and for the next 24 years, they are left on Titan by themselves, while humanity is fighting some war elsewhere in space, probably closer to Mars. And finally, after 24 years, a rescue ship comes to pick them up. However, they have really established their own little colony there, and they start to think, you know, if it took you guys 24 years to come and get us, well, maybe there's not really much of a purpose for us to go back. I mean, we've got our lives here now. So they take a vote, and in the end, everyone decides they're going to stay on their Titanian colony, and because Rhea was kind of a leader of the whole thing, they proclaim her to be the Queen of Titan, and they happily continue on living on Titan there. So that's what Rhea of Titan is about on this album here by Gekko Projekt. Not a famous band, but I really like the story, and the guitarist Peter Matukniak was also on another album I was considering adding in here, a band called Bomber Goggles, whose album Geirland was also a really interesting concept narrative album. But it didn't make the list this time. I did talk about it in a previous video, however. Anyway, Gekko Projekt, Rhea of Titan. So I'm trying to cover the lesser known artists and albums. Of course, The Sword is maybe not, but a little bit lesser known albums here at the beginning. But don't worry, I'll be getting on to some of the more famous albums later on. But I think this is a good opportunity to tell you of some of the albums you probably have not heard about. And this here is the Steve Bonino project with Stargazer and Stargazer 2, which is part 1, part 2 in a trilogy. The third one hopefully will be coming out at some point or another. But anyway, the Stargazer albums tell of Earth is in a very poor state, environmentally speaking. A vessel of human beings sets off for a planet outside Proxima b in the Alpha Centauri system. And they land on the planet, which is orbiting a red dwarf. And they begin their new civilization there. However, of course, there are many challenges, and this planet is also tidally locked. So they have to inhabit the Goldilocks zone, right on the border between day and night, where it is not too hot and it is not too cold. So they set up their new society there, and they build some big domes so that everybody can be safe from the harmful radiation that is coming to the planet's surface. Then they go on an exploration expedition to see what else is around on the planet there, and they come across the ruins of an ancient civilization. And as they explore the ruins, they find some ancient writings in the stone. And it so happens that one member of the exploration is an archaeologist who is very good at reading ancient languages, and he recognizes that this is actually ancient Sumerian cuneiform writing. So that suddenly makes everybody realize, hang on for a second, are the stories about the ancient Sumerians and their tablets depicting giant people flying in some winged vessel in the sky and what looks like planets in the etchings on those tablets, are those kind of those ideas that human beings were actually in some way alien progeny? Has that now just been confirmed? That's where we go with Stargazer 2, and I'm curious to know where Steve Bonino will take the story in Stargazer 3. Very interesting. This is basically, oh, check out those eyes on the back there. This is basically a progressive rock album, musically speaking. However, most of the songs are pretty short, and some instrumentals, and very good. That each one develops its part of the story and goes along very smoothly and nicely with no lengthy instrumental bits, in case you are not so interested in that. So, Steve Bonino Projekt, Stargazer, and Stargazer 2. So, moving along, this band here now is a little bit more well known. This is IQ, one of the neo-prog bands out of England, and this is their 1997 album Subterranea. Now, this story here was one that I was particularly interested in. It is the story of a man who has been raised underground, basically in a small room. Anyway, his world is his kind of underground apartment, I guess, and he has very minimal human contact. He is given food and he is given education, I think via a television screen, by a man called the Provider. And then one day, as an adult, he is released into the world, and he finds himself out on the street in the city with the sky far above and tall buildings and motor vehicles roaring past and lots of people walking and running here and there. And of course, it's a sensory overload, and he runs into some alley to escape it all. And of course, there in the alley, he's amongst the junkies and the homeless and the outcasts of society, basically. And he falls in with a religious cult, but they think he will be an easy person to get to join them, but he refuses them. And then he meets a young woman named Maya, who takes him in and starts to care for him. Now he's trying to make sense of his life. How was it that after all these years of living in that world, that was his world, why is he out here now discovering that this is actually what the real world is? And as he's trying to get used to figuring out his life, he finds out that he's being followed and watched by some people. And he manages one day to surprise one of them and basically kills him. But before doing so, asks him to tell him who is the name of the person behind this. He then later on finds out that there are other people still watching him, but there are also other people who are part of this same kind of social experiment. And meeting up, they all decide that they are going to try to get back at the person who did this to them. And they are lured then by this doctor. I've forgotten his name now, but anyway, they are then lured to an abandoned factory where they think they are going to finally meet him. However, instead, he and his henchmen spread kerosene around the place, light the whole factory on fire, and everyone inside is burned alive except for the protagonist, who manages to escape. And finally, the protagonist comes face to face with this doctor and then realizes that if he can go with the doctor and return to his underground habitation, he can then kind of, he's experienced way too much for his life, and he just wants to get back to that quiet, safe place that he knew all this time growing up. Now, they actually were going to make a movie out of this. I think they did finally. It took a long time. There were several years passing since the idea was decided that they were going to make a movie. They found the actors. They wrote out the story. Music from this plus additional music was supposed to be part of the soundtrack. However, in the end, it was just the additional music that the guitarist created that was used in the soundtrack. I did check out the movie reviews on the internet, and the reviews I found are really poor. The premise was maybe really good. However, the actual execution of the movie, the dialogue, the acting, and so on, most people gave it 1 out of 5 stars, which is unfortunate because it is an interesting story. Another thing is, I actually checked some information about people who had been raised like this as a kind of experiment, left in a secluded underground place of only one room and then finally released. There was a case over 100 years ago where a man found another man outside and who seemed very peculiar, and in the end it was discovered that this man had grown up in such a kind of small room all his life. There was another story of a man, I think it was in Switzerland maybe, who in his basement built an additional room, and then he locked his daughter in there, where he then came in regularly and raped her, but also cared for her, giving her food and making sure that she was healthy and alive, but repeatedly raping her. And he told his wife that the daughter had run away. So really a terrible story. And then the daughter became pregnant, I think it was at least twice, with her father's child. And he built an additional room in for them, and then when the children were born, he provided them with, of course, food, books and videos for education. The mother tried to educate her children as best as she could. And then finally, when she was about 40 or something, somehow, I don't remember how, but they managed to escape. And for the woman, it was returning to the outside world that she hadn't seen since she was, I think, 16 or something like that. Whereas for the children, they had never experienced anything else other than those 2 rooms underground. So for them, it was really a shocking experience to be out in this big world that we take for granted. And one thing was that the son, I remember they said he grew up very tall, but the ceiling was rather low in their underground apartment. So he always walked hunched over, and so he had to go through not only therapy for adjusting to this new life that he was now going to live, but as well he also had to go through rehabilitation in order to get him walking straight again as much as possible. Anyway, really terrible stories because they're true, but at least this one here is fictional, and it is very interesting, and the album is, typical IQ style. It is very cool stuff. Okay, moving on. So again, now we're going to look at two albums. These are by the band Unleash the Archers. The first one is called Apex, and the second one is called Abyss. This one was released in 2017, and this one in 2020. Now, I have talked about them previously. In the last video, actually, I talked about Abyss because it was one of those albums that I think was a really incredible album. But this time we're going to talk about the story, and the story is about a character called the Immortal, who lives in a mountain called Apex. Basically, he sleeps there until he is awoken by someone who says a special incantation to wake him from his sleep. And it's a little bit like a genie. The person who releases the genie from the bottle becomes the genie's master. And this is the same case here. If you say the incantation and awake the Immortal must serve you. Now, he is a fighter, a warrior of great fighting capacity, and he is awoken by a character called the Matriarch, who is basically the alpha character in that universe, and she wants to dominate everywhere, and having the Immortal as her weapon is just part of her power over her universe or her galaxy. And so she sends the Immortal off to fight some of her enemies just to show, I have this weapon and I dominate all. But she also had 4 sons, and there was some problem. Like, the sons would do what she told them, but they were not altogether thrilled about supporting her. So she finally killed all 4 of her sons and then bound their souls to her. Now, in the second story here, actually at the end of the first one, the Immortal has completed his deeds. He returns to Apex and goes back to his sleep, his slumber. However, by the second one, he wakes up and finds himself on a starship. And apparently, a grandson of the Matriarch, who hated the fact that his father was killed and originally thought the Immortal was to blame, but later found out that it was not the Immortal that was behind his father's death, but actually his grandmother, has then found the incantation to awaken the Immortal, has now taken the Immortal on a spaceship. The Immortal, I guess, was not fully awoken at the time or unconscious again, but anyway, wakes up on a spaceship, and the grandson introduces himself and says, I'm going to, take you away so that my grandmother will not have you as her powerful weapon. But of course, the Matriarch finds out about this and is very angry about it and chases after them. And finally, they have this showdown, which you see on the cover of the album here, where the Matriarch comes with the souls of her 4 sons to fight the Immortal. But in the heat of the battle, the Immortal finds how to destroy her, and so he does, and becomes victorious over the Matriarch. However, after the battle, he then finds that the grandson, which was basically like his one true friend and the person who was going to take him away from his life as a kind of, warrior slave, has been injured mortally in the battle, and they have a share of final words. And at the end, the Immortal can now walk away free. He has been released from his curse. However, the very end, there is a hint that as he's hearing the thoughts in his head, the voice of the Matriarch kind of returns, and it leaves you wondering, is he hearing the Matriarch's voice echoing? Is it the echo of all the evil deeds he has done in the past that are manifesting themselves in the form of the Matriarch's voice? Or is it that he actually does have some characteristic of evil within him that could come out in his future? We don't really know which path he is going to go on. So these are 2 brilliant albums. This one I just think is really super way up there. This one was the one that got me into the band. We're talking power metal here, but with a lot of additional stuff. And as well, the voice of the Matriarch is a gruff vocalization closer to extreme metal, whereas the lead vocalist is chiefly Brittany Slays, who is said to be a woman who can sing like Ronnie James Dio and Bruce Dickinson. And I would agree that she is a fantastic vocalist. And this band is a very terrific band too. Like the people are all really cool, it seems. Anyway, that is the story of the Immortal in Apex and Abyss, 2 albums by Unleash the Archers. Next up, I'd like to talk about a character that actually also appears over 2 stories. However, I'm going to focus on the second one. I am talking about Ziltoid the Omniscient. Now, Devin Townsend was with Strapping Young Lad, and he also had the Devin Townsend band, some solo stuff he was working on. And he sat down one time at home and wrote out this story about this alien being. I think he's a 4-dimensional being who comes to the Earth in search of the ultimate cup of coffee. And when he is dissatisfied with the coffee that he is given, he decides to attack the Earth. Then, for some reason, decides to show off his guitar playing skills, establishing him as the greatest guitar player ever. Then, as he goes to leave the Earth, the captain of the Earth Forces, Captain Spectacular, recognizes that Ziltoid is actually a nerd and decides to go to a hive being called Nebula 9 in order to help expose Ziltoid for what he is. However, Ziltoid then tries to surprise him with there. Nebula 9 basically tells Ziltoid, man, you gotta chill out, alright? Ziltoid then gets upset and decides he wants to blow up a planet with the help of a Planet Smasher being. However, the Planet Smasher also refutes him. At the end of the album, we find out that this whole story seems to have been in the mind of a lowly coffee shop worker. Now, that was the first one. Everything that was done on that was all done by Devin Townsend. Guitars, bass, vocals, of course, keyboards, did I say that? Everything except drums, which he used a drum machine for that. Then I think he had a guest of a couple of friends on doing some of the additional dialogue or voices for some of the characters. Now, some years later, he went ahead to do Ziltoid 2, or Z2 here. Now, this was a much bigger production. We had somebody coming in to do the voice of Captain Spectacular, someone doing the voice of Queen Blataria, the War Princess. We have characters called Poozers, which are all the children of Queen Blataria. We have Ziltoid is now regarded as a kind of hero on Earth, a celebrity, but he has taken a Poozer from Queen Blataria, brought it back to Earth, and the Poozer escapes, goes back and reports to its mother what happened. She gets totally peed off about it, and then the Poozer says that Earth has coffee. So, she goes to the Earth to try to get Ziltoid and as well attack the Earth and take it over for the coffee. So her Poozers attack the Earth in these massive war machines and they take every bit of coffee they can get their hands on. And in the meantime, Ziltoid now has been considered a kind of threat to the Earth because he stole a Poozer, which has brought Queen Blataria. He's put away in a safety building, a high security building of the highest security. However, he knows a way to help get rid of Queen Blataria, and so he signs a deal that he's going to help the humans. However, he signed it in pencil with his fingers crossed behind his back, so he says he didn't have to live up to his end of the deal. What he ends up doing is betraying Earth. However, there is a problem. He still has to get rid of Queen Blataria. And what he has done, he has brought the Planet Smasher, or had someone bring the Planet Smasher to Earth. Everybody fears this Planet Smasher for what they've heard about it, but it is actually just a small furry creature. However, the Planet Smasher does not follow the orders of Ziltoid. And then Captain Spectacular and Ziltoid have some dialogue where Captain Spectacular reveals that they are actually half-brothers. They have the same mother. At this point, Queen Blataria thinks, well, this is all fine and dandy, but you guys suck, and she says, this is how we do it where I come from, and she shoots Captain Spectacular. Ziltoid then cries and remembers some old song they used to sing from a musical. He begins singing, and the Planet Smasher absolutely hates musicals. That releases his thunderous, sonic, booming roar of a voice, which then sends Queen Blataria flying back out into space and through the wormhole from where she came. However, just before she's blasted away, she grabs Ziltoid and they both disappear through the wormhole. Earth is saved, and Earth then rejoices in both Ziltoid and Queen Blitaria having been blasted away. And for that recording, Devin Townsend asked about 2,000 people to send in recordings of them singing that song, and he put them all together. And I think at the time, it was the world's record for the most people singing together on one song, one track on an album. Anyway, this was later on staged as a stage performance with puppet for Ziltoid, and I don't know what else happened, but I think there's a DVD about that. In the end, it is such a bizarre story, and it is narrated by Bill Courage, who has just this great theatrical narrator voice. Devin said that this was just an album that he wanted to do so that someday in the future people would say, it's really incredible somebody did an album like this. Now, a lot of people actually prefer the first one, Ziltoid the Omniscient. However, I actually really like this one more. I just find there's more to be interested in with the different voices, the dialogues in between the songs. But I do like them both. Anyway, Devin Townsend, Z2 Ziltoid the Omniscient sequel. Okay. Hey everyone, you know what? I just noticed this video is probably going to get to be quite a bit long. We're over about the 30-minute mark right now, so why don't we call this part 1, and then I'm going to be back in part 2 to talk about some other albums, and probably some of these will be a little bit more familiar to you. So I hope you'll stick around to watch that. I'll get it up in a couple of days. Thanks for watching this video so far, and see you in the next one. Alright, take care. Bye.